My racing moment on Off the Ball.
And they're off.
Brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. Share every racing moment. Visit hri.ie.
Yeah, it's our brand new segment. It's called My Racing Moment. It's brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. Share every racing moment. Visit hri.ie, or you can follow Horse Racing Ireland on social media. And we thought, with it being Thyestes week, that we would speak with Edward O'Grady, who has a long-standing connection with this race and the day itself. Edward, good afternoon to you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Nice to hear you.
So 50 years this year to the day since you saddled your first winner on Thyestes Day. That is some innings.
Do you know something? It feels like yesterday. A lot of water's gone under the bridge, but I can't believe it's 50 years.
Can you put yourself in the mind of yourself this week 50 years ago in preparation for Thyestes Day and looking forward to it and thinking maybe you had a chance? What were you like? What was your level of expectation like for yourself, and what was the level of excitement like really when you knew you had a horse that had a chance?
Listen, my build up to the Thyestes Day was something that I wouldn't really wish on anybody. It was an extraordinary mixture of emotions. On the 3rd of January that year, I was married. And on the 13th of January, my poor late father died. So between the 13th of January and the Thiestes chase, the Turf Club very kindly granted me a temporary license. And so I was just going there as a sort of a student with a £300 overdraft in the Bank of Ireland in Ballsbridge, a widowed mother, suddenly a wife, employees, and God knows what, and the future in front of me. I mean, I was looking forward to it, but all at sea, I just didn't. It was very difficult to comprehend at the time, to take everything in.
That's mad. I didn't realise that the sequence of events was so fast and so quick and so connected. So I guess it must be bittersweet every year when the Thyestes comes around, because it does bring back memories of grief and happiness at the same time.
Well, I was very lucky at the time that I had, my father had left a great team, and Tim Hyde was his jockey. He was also my first cousin. Timmy Finn was my head lad, who was probably one of the best head lads of all time. Mouse Morris was my amateur jockey, or my dad's, stroke mine. So I had a very good young team with me, or stroke behind me, plus my mother was very positive as well, and was a great help. And so I think I did go forward with great optimism, and fingers crossed after that.
And had your dad died suddenly, had it always been part of your thinking that you would take over eventually?
Well, he had a lot of miles on the clock, and he had been ill for some time. But like everything, I hadn't expected him to go just exactly at that particular time. But anyhow, that's the way nature intended it. So there wasn't a lot we could do about it except get on with it. And
there was no doubt in your mind that you were going to step up and become a trainer, that the plan was there. You knew that this was your future. That's what I'm asking, I suppose.
Originally, I had intended to qualify as a vet, and I'd intended to go around the world, maybe to Australia and to America, to various different training centres, and then, in inverted commas, at my leisure, come back and maybe take over the place from my late father. But anyhow, things changed, and we just had to. The ball was put in my hands, so I had to just run with it when I got it.
Right, and so the Thyestes, obviously, very early on, very very soon after you get your temporary licence, that Thyestes Day. Do you remember the horse? Do you remember anything about?
Oh, I remember the horse well. She was a mare, belonged to Joe Murphy, who was from Littleton, and had a good few horses in training with my father. And she was a handicapper, and she ran in a handicap worth about, I think in those days, about 370 odd pounds, punts, and that was to the winner. And the races were they were as competitive then as they are now. They were, because there wasn't as much racing. and races were very competitive. A lot of very good trainers. Nobody dominating like they do at the moment, but a lot of very high-class trainers, the Francis Floods and the Paddy Slaters and all those of this world. Dan Moore, Arthur maybe had taken over, Jim Draper. So very, very competitive. So, and Thyestes is always a very competitive day. So we went there, fingers crossed. She wasn't favourite. She was about third or fourth favourite, I think. And just took our chances, yeah.
Do you remember much about the race?
I can't remember the race as such. I remember Tim gave her a very good ride. And I remember that she came through between the last two hurdles. I think the rest is a bit of a blur, quite frankly. I was probably so excited and so pleased and so everything. I was just thrilled, obviously.
What was it like coming into I think Goran's parade ring is one of the more iconic in racing, with the trees, and it's really beautiful parade ring, and it can be quite atmospheric as well. You must have been full of various emotions at that time.
Yeah, it was a prettier place in those days. They had a lot more trees. They're after getting rid of a lot of the trees. It was much more. It's much more like an English park course than an Irish course. And the Thyestes Day was always Farmers' Day, and particularly at that time and for the next decade when I trained, all my owners were mainly farmers. And this was just a magnificent gathering of farmers, owners, potential owners, and a wonderful place to do business. And obviously a lot of people congratulated me or whatever. And so I suppose when the iron is hot, you try and do a little bit of business. And that's probably what we did on the day.
Wow, right. That's great. You were into it straight away.
Well, I had no option. I had no option. As I say, I had a £300 student overdraft.
We've all had them.
And which was heavy enough. It was a case of get off your tail and start working, buddy. And whatever it took, you had to do.
I'm just trying to imagine Ireland at that time. Like, it just seems, fanciful that, a trainer would be generally training for farmers in 2022. So this was quite the norm in those days, was it?
Oh, very much so. Very much. Training fees, you see, were sort of £8 or £10 a week at the time. There was no inflation. Life was just so different, and there were a lot of people in the country. A lot of people actually had come over from. They weren't farmers; they were gentlemen farmers that had come over from England, and they had pensions. And then you had the good farmers. You'd always have the good farmers who make money. So therefore, horses weren't that expensive to buy. 8 or 10 quid a week wasn't exactly, even in those days, it wasn't exactly a fortune. It was probably a week's wages for a man, but at the same time, it wasn't a fortune. And people were able to afford it and enjoy it. It wasn't a great training racehorses. Wasn't a great money making job, but it was just a nice way of life.
Edward, there's a large portion of our audience who are nodding away, going, yeah, they understand the gentleman farmers and they understand the good farmers. And there's another portion of our listening population who are like, what does he mean? Please ask him. Is there an understood definition of the gentleman farmer?
Well, I think that some wealthy people came over from England, and they bought farms, and they had pensions, and they also had incomes from probably some old money in the UK, and they farmed like gentlemen. If it lost a few quid, well, it wasn't the end of the world because the income was going to come in anyhow. And they lived the life of Riley. They had a splendid time, and there were quite a few of those people around.
And were they good owners to have?
I beg your pardon?
Were they good owners to have?
Oh, they were wonderful owners. They loved to come and see their horses work, because the ordinary farmer would be out looking at his cattle, but they had nothing to do. They'd have the farm steward looking after the cattle or whatever it was. So they loved to come and see their horses work. They loved to come and have lunch and probably have a gin and tonic or two, and generally took life very easy. And having the racehorse was also part of a way of life.
And then the way you paint a beautiful, evocative picture of Thyestes Day, where everybody, they call it the race that stops Kilkenny, everybody converges on the course on the day, and you see this massive strata of Irish life, everybody who wants to work or is interested in or has a passing fancy for a horse.
Well as that, you must remember that all the betting took place on the race course. So fellas would appear in the smarter people would appear in the Crombie coats, and the farmers would appear in the big heavy coats, and there'd either be cash or there'd be credit, whichever way you'd want to put it. And the whole thing was about, most people wanted to have a bet on the day. The big betting race, of course, in those days was always the bumper. But at the same time, they had plenty of bets on the Thyestes chase and on the Sean Gullin chase and all the other chases that were there. And the atmosphere was absolutely incredible. There was no other way. Okay, you had a betting shop, but you didn't have any atmosphere there, obviously.
I think that you're painting a picture of a bygone era in some respects, Edward, that like almost a little bit before I even got into racing, but that people went racing because A, that's how they had a bet, and B, that was how they actually could watch the race.
Correct. I mean, the other way was they used to sometimes give the racing results on the radio. In fact, I can remember at I think it was 3:00 on Radio Éireann, they used to give out the runners for the next day's racing, and that we had the racing calendar, and you sat beside it was after the 3:00 news, and you sat beside your radio after the 3:00 news with the calendar, the racing calendar, which is a weekly publication. And the racing calendar used to publish the entries. And then you sat beside the radio, ticking off the runners for the next day. There were no jockeys, of course. You declared the jockeys on the day. But it was a lot different, I can tell you.
I think people do pine for that time as well, Ger, where the betting, you didn't know anything about the betting. Like, whereas now it's priced up over in the space of 5 minutes the day before, and then the market forms throughout the day and blah 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 blah, and everyone says it's great for punters. But in those days there was that massive anticipation of whatever amount of minutes before the race, the first bookie would go up, and that was that.
Well, you know, people, even though training fees were £10 a week or whatever, people still bet in 500s and thousands.
Wow.
Which by today is just enormous, and that was quite normal. I mean, that wouldn't be the way. Nobody would welsh on that sort of money. In fact, it used to be very funny that back in those days, if I may just tell a funny story, David Power was the one person who used to take the big bets. And for the bumper race, the market would start with so-and-so 5-1 and so-and-so 4-1 and so-and-so 10-1. And then obviously there'd be big bets put on, and people would be trying to put on big bets. And then the market would settle down to 5-2 and 7-4. But David anyhow used to take himself to the bathroom, and he would sit down in the bathroom at the races until they'd sort of just about say, and jockeys are mounting or whatever, you see, or the horses are leaving the parade ring. And by the time he'd come out, the big prices would all have been gone. and the market would have settled. The favourite would be 7-4, and somebody else would be 2-1, and then he used to lay those prices. He made sure that he missed all the big price. He didn't have to lay any of those, but he was a marvellous layer and a marvellous payer. Well, it was wonderful.
It worked out for him pretty well. It worked out in the end for him pretty well. Edward, this is a brilliant start to our brand new series, which is called My Racing Moment. Thanks so much for sharing your memories of Thyestes Day 50 years ago at Gilroy Park. My Racing Moment is brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. Share every racing moment. Visit hri.ie or follow Horse Racing Ireland on social media.
My racing moment on Off the Ball.
And they're off.
Brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. Share every racing moment. Visit hri.ie.